Good afternoon. We're here at the Seattle Antiquarian Book Fair. The date is October 12th, 2008. I'm Taylor Bowie, and I'm sitting here speaking with Vic Zoschak, bookseller friend from Alameda, California, who has a shop called Tavistock Books. Very nice place I visited.
Not often enough.
Not often enough. I will be the first to admit that. So welcome, Vic.
Thank you, Taylor. Thank you. It's
joining us here. And just to start things out, I want to hear about your background, your family, where you were born and raised, your schooling, what you did before you went into the book trade.
Okay. Grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. High school of, a couple thousand, so I was one of many, but my family was, I'd say, middle class, or middle class perhaps, and I had no great aspirations for college. So my father heard a spot for the Coast Guard Academy on a local radio station, called them, got all the paperwork, said, "Sign here, kid." The next thing I know, they were dropping me off at Chase Hall in New London, Connecticut for the Coast Guard Academy. That was June 1970, and I retired from the Coast Guard the 1st of July 1997. 2 weeks later, I opened the shop in Alameda, and that was coming up on 12 years ago.
Gee, that's amazing. I had no idea. I'm glad we started with this. Well, when you were growing up and going to school there in St. Louis, would you say your family was a bookish sort of family? Were there a lot of books around?
No, not at all. I was the only one in the family that read at all. And I had my own small library as a kid, Hardy Boys mainly, and Tom Swift, that sort of thing. My father did not read all that much magazines. Mother the same. My brother was a jock. In fact, he got a full ride to Tulsa on a football scholarship. So I was the only one, and books have been part of my life ever since I was 8 years old. I remember spending my allowance and earnings buying paperback science fiction books at the local corner drugstore.
What piqued your interest at that age? You weren't finding it at home?
I liked the worlds the books took me to. You know, it was an escape, I guess you might say. I mean, not that my life was all that bad as a youngster, but it seemed so much more exciting to go off to Mars on an exploration trip or something like that. You know, that was the kind of excitement I wasn't getting in school or whatever.
Well, you were a career in the Coast Guard, and you retired at Commander. Is that
I did,
correct?
Commander. Yes,
that's right. And 2 weeks later, you opened a bookshop.
But
you must have had this in your mind.
Exactly. The Coast Guard is an up route system, as is all military services. At some point, you're going to need to find another job, no matter whether you go all the way to Commandant of the Coast Guard or not. And in the mid-'80s, I started going from a reader that just acquired books, paperbacks or whatever, to a collector. I discovered Charles Dickens. And the summer trip in '86, I think, to Vancouver, British Columbia, I bought a first edition of Pickwick Papers. That was my summer souvenir of the trip. And that was, as they say, was the end of it all, or the beginning of the end, or whatever.
Do you recall who you bought it from?
I think it was a little store called Poor Richard's. Does that ring a bell?
That was in Victoria.
Okay, there you are. Yeah, the trip was to Vancouver to actually meet with my parents, but we took a side trip to Victoria, and it was Poor Richard's.
Did you tell your parents that you bought this?
Oh, sure. I mean, I was in mid-30s and blah, blah, blah. But I found I liked Dickens, and I started buying more, and then I got the collecting bug, and next thing you know, I've got a fairly decent Dickens collection for someone starting so late, But that led to the fact that, hey, I like this book thing, and in 1989, after spending 3 months working for Barry Cassidy in Sacramento, that's where I was living at the time, I decided, well, I'm going to try it on my own. I took out the resale license and started the business.
Oh, really?
It wasn't until '93 I got serious about it, though. That's when I did my first book fair.
Well, I take it you were stationed in places long enough that you could establish and take care of your collection.
When I was in Sacramento, it was a 4-year tour flying C-130s out of the Air Force Base up there. Then I did 2 years in Hawaii, which was the book business was put on hold because you can't buy books out there.
Shouldn't.
And came back to Alameda in '91, and there I was on the cusp of either doing English literature or rare books, because again I knew I was going to be needing another career.
So you'd anticipate maybe becoming a teacher?
Well, I got into Stanford, their English Lit program.
Oh, sure.
But my first course was Dickens at night, full-time job, and the teacher wanted us, the professor, wanted us to read 5 of his major novels. That's 1,000 pages each. This is in the space of 4 months. Write 5 papers, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking, he used to write these things. It took 2 years to write a book. And I'm supposed to read one in a month and a half, write a 20-page paper on it, and then so I didn't like the fire hose aspect.
No.
And plus, about that time, I found in a San Francisco bookshop Goodrich's second book for $25, $30, something like that, and I sold it to an institution for $1,250. And I'm thinking, hey, I can make some money at this. Yeah. So I've never seen another one since, and that was 15 years ago.
It's more important when it happened probably than even how much you made to get you on the path.
So that's what tipped me into the book selling over academia, and I started doing book shows in 1995. Peter Howard and Barry Cassidy and 2 other gentlemen, sadly I can't remember the 2 at the moment, sponsored me for the ABA. I was accepted, and I think I did my first book fair in Washington, D.C. shortly thereafter. Yeah.
Book fairs are still obviously an important part of your business.
They are. I do most of the ones on the West Coast. Don't fly back east too much anymore. It gets to be a lot of work. But I think book fairs are a vital component of the trade.
But I gathered from previous conversations, you're a firm believer in the open shop concept.
I do. Yeah. Though I have to admit, as a one-man band, I'm open by chance or by appointment. If I'm in town, I'm there 6 days a week, generally from 9 to 5. But if I'm out of town, like here this weekend, it's closed.
It's part of the chance.
Yeah.
Obviously, the internet has been the biggest change in our trade. How has the internet affected your business or your perception of the business?
Actually, I've sort of grown up with it. Back in '93, I was on Prodigy, which had a book bulletin board or whatever they call it. So I was selling books there. I was buying books from people on there. And one of the things that benefited me was right about that time, book databases were coming in, and I bought one called Bookminder, which I've used ever since then. It's based on FileMaker Pro, and so that I've been pretty much internet oriented, online oriented. I think is probably a better way of saying things.
So it was something you did not come to with fear or trepidation?
No, not whatsoever. I embraced it.
Yeah,
I embraced it.
That's great.
Others have gone beyond where I'm at, much beyond where I'm at, and so it's something I actually need to address in terms of my business plan. But I think it's been overall a good thing for the trade.
You and your business and the internet all kind of grew at the same time. Yeah. I see that. What about the future? What about the future of the book trade, the future of the ABAA? Where are we going from here?
The book trade, I think, is based on book collectors. And after the dinner Friday night where the 3 young people were honored for their efforts in their collecting, I'm encouraged. I also have just recently helped sponsor a 30-year-old that is up for ABA membership, Brad Johnson with the bookshop in Covina.
Oh, great.
And so I'm presuming he'll be accepted. He's a fine young man. Yeah. And that should bring down that average age of 62. So I'm encouraged about what I'm seeing in terms of the book collecting trade and those entering into the hobby, I guess, profession, trade. And the ABAA, again, I'm encouraged. We just sponsored or got in Brian Cassidy, a young 40-year-old, Ian Kahn, Lux Mentis, mid-40s. Brad, who's coming in, another fellow I've sponsored, Joaquin Koch, is mid-40s. So I think we're alive and well.
I should have to add John Lang.
Yes, John Lang.
Only 41, and he's been in several years.
Exactly. Yeah. What I hope to see the ABAA do to a little bit better degree is take advantage of what the internet can do in terms of outreach. I personally believe we can do a little bit better job than that, though I understand as an organization of volunteers that it's difficult to get the manpower that's necessary not only to implement those changes, but to keep on top of them and update them and make sure they're current and timely.
Exactly. Vic, you've been a collector and a bookseller for a long time. Who would you consider, in the time you've been dealing and handling books, the great people in the book trade? The ones that influenced you, or the ones that made the biggest impression on you?
Well, I have to say Peter Howard, for one. As an East Bay bookseller, he's certainly a force to be reckoned with. As we all do, Peter has his good points and his not so good points, but in the final shakeout, I think the good outweigh the bad. He's a phenomenal bookseller.
Oh.
Barry Cassidy. I mean, the first sort of antiquarian bookseller that I was introduced to when I started out in collecting. His ethics, sort of are impeachable, and so that's sort of the foundation of what I saw. And there have been others over the years. Yourself, Taylor, you're an individual that cannot go not noticed, if you know what I mean, and your views on various topics I've taken to heart. I'm not going to say I necessarily agree with them, but you have some very insightful views into various aspects of the trade, and those coming into it would do well to read your back postings. So there's a few.
I was hoping you weren't going to say you don't like oysters.
I love oysters, and I got a book for you. It's
good. Well, that's
preparing oysters for
that's very good to hear.
Consumption.
We're looking ahead now. I hate to say it, you and I probably aren't going to be around in another 50 years in the book trade. How would you imagine the future of the book and the book trade of our professional organization, the ABAA?
Well, I like to think what we're mainly dealing in is artifacts,
right.
Collectibles. And so I don't see that as changing. While maybe there's two forces at work. Well, maybe the younger folks aren't necessarily dealing with books in the same manner you and I did as we were growing up. The number of younger people is growing. I mean, the population in the world is growing. And so perhaps it'll be stable. It might not be a growing trade, but I think it'll be a stable trade.
Are you saying
that's one man's view? Anyway.
You perhaps see the end of the book as a source of information and just an artifact?
Not necessarily it's never been a source per se. It's been a repository, and so. But there are better repositories of information than books. Not in all cases, but certainly a good example is the American Book Prices Current. You used to have a whole wall of volumes,
right.
But it was difficult to use. You wanted to start at 1900 and search to 1970. That'd take you all friggin' day, pardon my French. Whereas now, then they went to a CD, okay? And most people said, hey, I can get rid of that wall and I can put saleable stock up there,
exactly.
And then now everybody's going to online. You don't even need to deal with that little CD anymore. You can just go online where it's updated monthly as opposed to annually. And what's important is not the conveyor of that information, it's the information.
Absolutely.
So in that case, yes, I think that book has gone away. They're no longer published. And other examples, I think, will come to the fore. Nobody uses a whole room of the NUC anymore. If you're going to use it at all, you use the fiche.
Or books in print.
Another one, example.
Shelf.
So as a conveyor of information, that particular technology has gotten outmoded. It hasn't gotten outmoded in the latest crime novel or whatever, but that's going to come, I think. Not necessarily in your lifetime or my lifetime, but I think it probably will. The Kindle's a good example. It's getting there. It's not there yet, but it is getting there. And it's something we got to face. I mean, the guys that made horsewhips or whatever, they had to face the fact that the horseless carriage was coming and it would take over. It's a matter of convenience. Whatever's more convenient and fits your budget, that'll take over.
Yeah.
Artifacts will remain.
Right.
You want to possess that first edition of give me an author, Taylor. Dickens.
Charles Dickens.
All right.
That's the author I was going to give you.
Well, I liked reading them in the first edition when I was a collector.
Right.
And I spoke to a young collector again, under 40, bought a first edition of David Copperfield from Beebe. He wanted to read it.
He wanted to read it
in the original. So, but it's an artifact.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he's not going to throw it in the back of his car. He's not going to do any of that kind of stuff. But he wanted to read it.
want to touch on something that one of the other interviewees alluded to earlier. See from your perspective what you think. When our friend David Meeker was starting out as a collector, there were a lot of people who were completists on authors, who wanted not only the first editions of the books, but magazine appearances, periodicals, weird translations. Have you also seen a decline in that kind of interest, where people more attracted to the high spots and not the supporting material?
The last completist that I knew was myself. I was a Dickens completist. I had the printout from the New Cambridge Bibliography of English Literature, and it's as complete a Dickens collection as you could ever do. And my goal was to get one of every item in there. Never succeeded, of course. I've not met anybody that's come to me and said, I want everything. It just hasn't happened. I know they're out there. I've heard others talk of them, but I don't see it as a prevalent way of collecting a subject or an author or what have you.
Just for example, in your own customer base, do you have anyone who's even trying to get every Dickens book, or do they just want the ones that mean
They want the major ones,
right.
or they want all the ones in parts, or
right.
something like that. But nobody that's expressed an interest in building something like Richard Gimble was the last completist of Dickens, and his catalog now is a valuable reference. But nobody of that scope, no, I've not seen it.
Nick Karanovich for Twain.
Yeah. Presumably there's one Dickens guy.
Why do you suppose that's changed?
Gosh, I wish I knew.
Is it a short attention span, or what?
Yeah, that I don't know.
Yeah.
Can't address it because I've not met anybody that's I've been able to discuss with them, well, why are you going this way as opposed to this way.
You don't want to.
Yeah.
You want to give them some guidance, but not.
It's something I talk about in book collecting courses I give, but
you also give book
yes
collecting? I didn't know that.
Well, I give a workshop for new booksellers on reference books. That's once a year. It's a one-day thing. It's free. I do it as a give back to the trade, if you will.
Where do you do that?
In my shop.
Oh, great.
Well, I've got a reference book collection of about 2,500 volumes, so it's it's the basic references a new bookseller will encounter in various subject genres. And then I talk mainly at the San Francisco Book Fair. I give the one-day hour talks on book collecting and so forth. And of course, you always have people coming in the shop and want to talk about book collecting and think about starting, blah, 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 this way, that way, that sort of thing. Or here at book fairs. But nobody's expressed an interest, or I've heard them say, yeah, I want everything, or I'm going to build a collection that encompasses. So, no.
Yeah, I can see that. Although you're not there all the time, you do enjoy the open shop.
I do.
And, you find that this attracts not only customers, buyers, but people with books to sell? Yeah,
and that's one reason I'm very happy is Alameda's an out-of-the-way place, so I don't get a lot of things in the door. Plus, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area where you have established booksellers like Peter Howard and Black Oak Books and blah, blah, blah. But nevertheless, I get some things come in the door that have been quite interesting. One of the most interesting things was a first U.S. printing of a Handels Messiah that ended up going to Yale. I mean, that walked in the door.
Walked in the door, literally.
Yeah.
That's great.
So,
are you one of those who's industrious enough to go out on house calls when called upon?
Occasionally, I try and filter what's being offered. A lot of paperbacks. Was it a book club that you bought these? That sort of thing. But yeah, if there's enough hints that it might be worth my time, I'll hang up the close sign and go.
I've always advised people to do that.
Yeah, well, I remember that too.
Yeah. Did you get caught with me a few times?
Just that you recommended that in conversations, and so I took that to heart.
I'm a firm believer in that. What's another thing besides the Messiah that walks through the door?
Well, there's a book here that's making the rounds, actually.
Really?
It was, H.P. Lovecraft had this book he made up in his tales, Necromonicon or something like that. Well, somebody did presumably a facsimile, or did it, and said, and it was when I walked in, the guy said, I'm moving, I need to make some money from selling books, would you like to buy these? I said, yes, I would. I can give you X. He said, I'll sell them for X, and we had a transaction. But then I put it online in one of my little postings that I do occasionally to the trade list. Brian Cassidy called 3 seconds later and said, I'll take it. He sold it here to Paraj's friend, Lauren, I think.
Oh, interesting.
And so books make the rounds.
They do indeed.
Yeah.
what would booksellers do without other booksellers?
Well, the trade supports the trade, I
It
think.
really does, both financially and spiritually.
And collegially. That's one of the great aspects of the trade, are the friends. I have one friend left from my Coast Guard days.
Isn't that interesting?
And the number of friends that I have in the trade it's exponential. I've met kindred souls, I guess.
No, you're right. It is rare to find a bookseller who most of their friends are also booksellers. It's a testimony to.
It's a wonderful profession.
How long does your lease at your shop have to go?
Well, it's funny you ask. It has another year and a half, and I've already been making feelers about extending it. I said I want to go. That'll take me through the age 57, and I've said I'd like to extend the lease through age 65, so 8 more years, and then I'd see where I am health-wise and all that sort of thing. They haven't got back to me yet, but it's a year off, and they're sort of last-minute kind of folks. Right. So we'll see what happens.
Well, let's say you kept the shop or you didn't. Do you see yourself retiring from the book trade?
No.
Not even.
I'm going to remember George Kane.
Very well.
Very active up until his 90s.
Yeah.
He's my role model.
Good for you. He's a good role model to have. Are you ever in touch with him anymore?
No. Sadly, his health sort of took a nosedive,
Right.
and he's. I think he's still with us. I haven't heard otherwise, but he's not active anymore.
I know that. Well, George would be 95 or 96 now by my calculation.
Yeah, but he was active up until 90.
Yeah, fascinating man.
We had a big birthday party for him on his 90th, and he was still spry and dancing around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I was taken with him very early on, and he was probably about 80 when I met him.
I don't doubt it.
In his late 70s, anyway.
He's a pistol.
Well, that's something to which we can all hope to aspire.
Yeah, definitely.
So, well, thank you very much, Vic.
Taylor, thank you. It's been a pleasure. For years, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.